Welcome to the lecture on diuretics, and this will be followed by the lecture on heart failure, drugs for heart failure, wherein we will revisit the diuretics again, as well as the other drugs that we have discussed in the previous lectures on the cardiovascular drugs. So let me start first with a review of renal autocoids. And by the way, I will just emphasize on the important points. The other data will be in the manuscript and in the textbook. No? So we'll start with the renal autocoids first, and I'll walk you through their function in renal homeostasis. And then we will go to the basic and clinical pharmacologic features of the various diuretics. No? So let me share my slide first. Okay. So these are your various renal autocoids, and this is exemplified by adenosine, your prostaglandins, as well as your natriuretic peptides. No? Your adenosine is an autocoid that is released by renal tissues in response to increased tubular sodium chloride reabsorption and in conditions of hypoxia. It will have a different or opposing effect on the blood vessels depending on the location of the nephron. In the superficial cortical nephrons, adenosine will cause vasoconstriction of the afferent arterioles, and this will lead to a reduction in renal blood flow and GFR. No? In the deeper cortical nephrons, as well as the medullary nephrons, this will cause the opposite effect, which is vasodilatation. No? Adenosine will also stimulate sodium chloride transport in the proximal convoluted tubules of the cortical nephrons, but it will inhibit this process in the thick ascending limb and collecting ducts of the medullary nephrons. Now, adenosine is a renin inhibitor. Now, if you remember, renin is the enzyme that helps convert angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. So this is the rate limiting step in your RAS. No? Now, nowadays we have synthetic adenosine receptor blockers, and these have been shown to oppose the sodium proton exchanger activity in the PCP. No? So by opposing this effect of the sodium proton exchanger in the proximal convoluted tubule, adenosine receptor blockers will cause diuresis. No? But in contrast with the diuretics that work on segments prior to the collecting ducts, you do not lose potassium with adenosine receptor blockers. Now, your prostaglandins, we don't know the exact role, but as far as renal prostaglandins are concerned, we have identified several important functions. So, for example, when you talk about PGE2, PGE2 is a renal prostaglandin that has been shown to reduce sodium chloride reabsorption in the thick ascending limb and also reduce ADH effects on water reabsorption in the collecting ducts. So this enhances greatly the effect of loop diuretics. No? So the intake of NSAIDs, which will inhibit the synthesis of prostaglandins by inhibiting COX-2 enzyme, will significantly decrease the effect of the loop diuretics. And later on, we will see that the effects of the other diuretics are decreased as well with the use of NSAIDs. No? So we'll get back to this later. Now, in the slide before you are your various natriuretic peptides, no? ANP or atrial natriuretic peptide and brain natriuretic peptide are produced in the atrium in response to several conditions and several substances. No? For example, this is released whenever you have atrial, in response to atrial stress, in response to intravascular volume expansion, sympathetic stimulation, no, vigorous exercise or activity. This is also released whenever a person assumes a standing position from a supine position. And this is also stimulated in the presence of AVP hormone, glucocorticoids, and in certain disease states, now you have also secretion of these natriuretic peptides in conditions like heart failure and chronic renal diseases. No? And then you have other similar substances coming from the kidneys, that's in the form of urodilantine. No? And just like your ANP and BNP, it will have similar effects. And these natriuretic peptides are also vasodilators, no? So they can help lower blood pressure. The C-type natriuretic peptide is a similar autocoid that is released in the CNS. No? So nowadays we have synthetic versions exemplified by nasiritide. This is a synthetic BNP that is being tried in heart failure and as diuretic adjuncts or enhancers. Then we go to the main diuretics, and as you can see, there are several types, and they will have different sites of action along the nephron. Now, for example, your carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, as well as your sodium glucose cotransporter 2 or SGLT2 inhibitors, will mainly act on the proximal convoluted tubule. No? Your osmotic diuretics will act mainly in the thin descending limb and to a certain extent the proximal convoluted tubule. Then you have your very potent loop diuretics which act mainly on the thick ascending limb. And then you have the thiazides, whose main site of action will be on the distal convoluted tubule. And then there are agents like your potassium sparers and ADH blockers or antagonists, which act on the collecting duct. So we'll go through them one by one. Your carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, exemplified by acetazolamide, are not commonly used as diuretics. They're mainly used in non-edematous states, no? In non-cardiac conditions, like for example, their main use is in glaucoma, no? Because these agents as topical formulations can reduce intraocular pressure. No? So as in the diagram, these agents inhibit carbonic anhydrase, and this results to the blockade of sodium bicarbonate reabsorption. So I think I included the kinetics of acetazolamide in the manuscript. It's a drug that is well absorbed orally. You can see the effects in about half an hour. The peak effects will be in a couple of hours, and the duration will last to about half a day. No? Now, it is said that carbonic anhydrase inhibitors exemplified by acetazolamide can inhibit as much as 85% of sodium bicarbonate reabsorption. But this is offset by the fact that there are other segments in the nephron which can reabsorb sodium bicarbonate independent of carbonic anhydrase action. So in the presence of carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, the overall sodium bicarbonate reabsorption is reduced to about 45%. So you will see that the loss of bicarbonate is still significant. And therefore, with the loss of bicarbonate, this causes hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. No? So you are able to retain your chloride instead, and you develop hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. And so this is the reason why the effect, the diuretic effect of acetazolamide usually does not extend very long. No? In 2 to 3 days, nawawala na yung effect niyan. The effect will dissipate because the significant loss of bicarbonate will eventually trigger or enhance sodium chloride reabsorption. Okay. Now, aside from hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis, your carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, by alkalinizing the urine, because of course you have a lot of bicarbonate that is retained in the filtrate, this will be an alkalinized environment, no? And that will lead to crystallization of phosphates and calcium, and they can lead to stone formation. No? In very high doses, to a certain extent, they can also cause potassium wasting, no? Renal potassium wasting. So you can also lose potassium. No? And you can also lose phosphates and calcium, no, from the blood. So you can have hypophosphatemia and hypocalcemia. In very high doses, this can induce drowsiness and paresthesias. And for those with renal failure, they can manifest with nervous toxicities. No? Some persons may be vulnerable to hypersensitivity reactions to carbonic anhydrase, to acetazolamide. No? And because the urine is alkalinized by the presence of a lot of bicarbonate, no? In patients with liver failure, this can be particularly harmful because the alkalinized urine will decrease elimination of ammonia. No? And so you tend to retain ammonia in the blood, you develop hyperammonemia, and this can lead to hepatic encephalopathy. So the next group will also act in the proximal convoluted tubule, and these are actually considered as third-line medications for diabetes mellitus. And you will realize why they are very useful in diabetic type 2 because of their mechanism of action. No? So your SGLT2 inhibitors will prevent glucose reabsorption in the PCT. No? So they inhibit the co-transporter and significantly prevent reabsorption of glucose in this area. No? And one very important drug interaction that I have to emphasize is this. No? They are, their efficacy is reduced when the patient is also given a RAS inhibitor. No? Like for example, you have an ACE inhibitor or an ARB or renin also being taken by the patient. And this is because the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system will facilitate the synthesis of your sodium glucose co-transporter 2, which is the site of action of these inhibitors, no? As their name connotes. So when you give your RAS inhibitors, you also lessen the synthesis of these co-transporters, and you therefore lose much of the efficacy of these drugs because there is a decrease in the SGLT2 co-transporters, which is their main site of action. No? Now, your inhibitors are rapidly absorbed in the GIT, and they will have a half-life of about 10 to 12 hours. No? They undergo liver metabolism both by phase 1 and then they go through phase 2. So they are eliminated as glucuronide conjugates. No? So 70% will have to undergo hepatic metabolism. And the rest will be excreted unchanged in the urine. So we need to avoid them in cases where you have renal failure and cirrhosis of the liver. No? Now, one important drug interaction will be with inducers of CYP450 group of enzymes. So because your SGLT2 inhibitors are metabolized partly through phase 1. Therefore, they are dependent on the action of your CYP450 group of hepatic microsomal enzymes. So when you take in concomitantly an inducer such as rifampicin, no, the activity of these enzymes are enhanced. So you have faster metabolism and deactivation of your SGLT2 inhibitors. So mawawalan din kaagad ng effect. No? And therefore, these are significant drug interactions. One will be with the RAS inhibitors and the other will be with enzyme inducers exemplified by the TB drug rifampicin. Okay, so on the slide on the right side, you will see the available prototypes of your SGLT2 inhibitors. And they're very beneficial in diabetic type 2 because they have been shown to reduce the glycosylated hemoglobin levels of these patients. No? They may also help regulate the weight by their diuretic effect. So they can be beneficial in obese diabetics, no? And also beneficial for hypertensive persons because they help lower blood pressure, again, through their diuretic effect. So unlike your sulfonylureas and insulin, your SGLT2 inhibitors do not cause hypoglycemia. The drawback will be an increased risk of UTI and genital fungal infections like candidiasis. Then we go to the most potent of your diuretics. These are your loop diuretics, and these are the most efficacious drugs. No? They act by inhibiting the reabsorption of sodium chloride in the thick ascending limb of the loop of Henle. No? But unlike your acetazolamide, their use is not inhibited by the development of acidosis. So they will continue their effects, no, longer. Unlike in acetazolamide, when you develop acidosis, nawawala na yung diuretic effect ng gamot. Okay? So, these drugs are exemplified by furosemide, etacrylic acid, bumetamide, and torsemide. The most common, I think, will be furosemide. So I think this will be familiar enough for you. No? Now, they reach their site of action, which is the lumen of the thick ascending limb, by a process of glomerular filtration and also tubular secretion. No? So in the manuscript are the kinetic features of the various prototypes, no? Their duration of action, their absorption rate, etc. No? Now, the diuretic activity, the amount or the degree of diuretic efficacy of the drugs will correlate with how much of the drug actually reaches the site of action. And since they reach their site of action by virtue of glomerular filtration and PCT secretion, no, the diuretic activity will therefore correlate with these processes. So the more they are secreted and filtered through the glomerulus, the more drug molecules reach the site of action, which is the thick ascending limb lumen. So when you give weak acids like NSAIDs, again, nandiyan na naman yung NSAIDs, and then probenecid. Probenecid is a uricosuric agent. This is given therefore in hyperuricemia to cause uricosuria, to induce uric acid diuresis. And these are weak acids, no? And the problem is they compete with your loop diuretics in the secretory processes occurring in the PCP. So concomitant administration of weak acids with the loop diuretics, exemplified by NSAIDs and probenecid, will reduce the amount of prostaglandins that will get to reach their site of action. And therefore, this will decrease the efficacy of your agent. Okay, so this is their site of action, as the diagram presents to you. The sodium-potassium 2-chloride cotransporter is the one that is inhibited by the loop diuretics and thereby diminishing sodium chloride reabsorption. No? When this particular cotransporter is inhibited by the drug, you also lose the lumen negative potential that is created by the recycling of potassium. No? And therefore, the loss of this lumen negative potential will also inhibit the reabsorption of calcium and magnesium in this area. No? And so in certain cases, patients can develop severe hypomagnesemia. No? But severe hypocalcemia is not very common because this is offset by calcium reabsorption occurring in other segments of the nephron that are not affected by the loop diuretics. For instance, in the distal convoluted tubule, which is the next segment, there is a vitamin D-induced calcium absorption and a parathyroid hormone-induced renal calcium absorption that occurs. No? And so generally, this will offset the loss of calcium produced by the loop diuretics. No? So compared to hypomagnesemia, you do not see severe hypocalcemia as much, no, because of that. Now, your loop diuretics will also induce cyclooxygenase enzyme expression. No? And cyclooxygenase 2 is the enzyme that catalyzes the production of prostaglandins from precursor arachidonic acid in the cell membrane. No? Now, we know from my earlier statement how your prostaglandins will help enhance the loop diuretics. So again, the concomitant use of NSAID will remove these beneficial effects by inhibiting the synthesis of prostaglandins. No? And so this is especially detrimental for patients with renal or hepatic compromise. Now, also the release of prostaglandins that is induced by the diuretic, especially the loop diuretics, is the mechanism that probably causes an increased renal blood flow and a reduction of pulmonary vascular congestion and left ventricular pressure even before the diuretic effects kick in. No? So they really contribute to the efficacy of the loop diuretics. Now, these are your various toxicities. No? you do develop metabolic acidosis. However, this is because of hypokalemia, and this will not disrupt or inhibit the subsequent diuretic action, no? So tuloy-tuloy pa rin yung diuretic action ng loop diuretics despite the development of hypokalemic metabolic acidosis. Especially with the intake of other ototoxic drugs like your aminoglycoside antibiotics, your loop diuretics may cause dose-dependent but reversible ototoxicity. Now, your loop diuretics will also, because they are secreted in the proximal convoluted tubule, no, to be able to reach their site of action in the loop of Henle, they compete with uric acid, no, in the secretory process. So the use of loop diuretics may lessen the amount of uric acid that is secreted into the filtrate, and this can lead to hyperuricemia and precipitation of gout. No? So hypomagnesemia and hypocalcemia have been mentioned, and we can address these through supplementation. Now, the three prototypes that I mentioned, no, furosemide, torsemide, and bumetamide, are sulfonamide in structure, and therefore there are certain individuals who happen to be allergic to them, no? So there are susceptible individuals who are allergic to the sulfonamide component of many drugs, no, including your loop diuretics. So you have also sulfonamide-based antibiotics and NSAIDs, no. So these can all precipitate hypersensitivity reactions in susceptible individuals, no. Because the loop diuretics cause significant diuresis, you can induce severe hyponatremia and water loss, no, severe dehydration. And in certain cases, you also lose a lot of thiamine through your urine, and especially in heart failure patients, no? So you can end up with thiamine deficiency in this subset of patients. So I mentioned this already, and we also have to be careful in giving the loop diuretics in patients with liver failure, heart failure, and renal compromise. Okay. The next, in terms of potency, will be your, and efficacy rather, will be your thiazides, no? And as you probably remember, the thiazides prevent sodium chloride reabsorption in the distal convoluted tubule, no? So they generally prevent more of sodium chloride rather than sodium bicarbonate reabsorption. However, some of the prototypes will have some carbonic anhydrase inhibition as well, no? So they can also cause, these prototypes can also cause inhibition of sodium bicarbonate. But mainly their majority or their main effect will be sodium chloride reabsorption prevention. Now, the thiazides are also sulfonamides in terms of their chemical structure. So there are certain individuals that may have hypersensitivity reactions to this group of agents. They are well absorbed orally, no? Of the various prototypes, such as those indicated in the right of your screen, chlorthalidone, chlorthiazide is the only one that has an IV formulation. Hydrochlorothiazide is a very potent agent, and therefore they are used in lower doses than the rest. Chlorthalidone also is highly efficacious. It has a long duration of action. I think it can last for about 72 hours, no, 3 days. and it has slow absorption as well. Now, they are able to reach their site of action, which is the lumen of the BCT, through secretion in the proximal convoluted tubule. That is why they can also precipitate hyperuricemia, because they will also compete, just like the loop diuretics, they will also compete with the secretory processes in the PCT. So the presence of thiazides will reduce the amount of uric acid that can be secreted into the filtrate, and therefore you can have hyperuricemia and precipitation of gout. No? So the different thiazides will also have different kinetics. No? Now, this is the site of action. As you can see, they inhibit the sodium chloride transporter in the distal convoluted tubule. So you have prevention of reabsorption of sodium chloride. No? Now, unlike the loop diuretics dito, you don't lose calcium, and this is because they actually favor calcium reabsorption here, no? And this effect is seen in the distal convoluted tubule, and to a certain extent, the proximal convoluted tubule as well, no? So in the distal convoluted tubule, the sodium-calcium exchanger in the basolateral membrane is activated by the lowering of intracellular sodium, no? Because this drug will prevent reabsorption of sodium. So pag bumaba yung intracellular sodium, natitrigger yung sodium-calcium exchanger, no? And this will favor calcium reabsorption. In the proximal convoluted tubule, in which this some of the prototypes here will also have an effect, no? There is ongoing passive reabsorption of calcium and even sodium, no? And this is brought about or triggered by volume depletion caused by the diuretic effect of the thiazides, no? So, however, the enhancement of calcium reabsorption in this area promoted by thiazides will not lead to hypercalcemia in ordinary situations. No? It may only be significant in cases where the patient has hyperparathyroidism. Okay, so by removing or reabsorbing calcium from the filtrate, they help in preventing calcium renal stone formation. And by reabsorption of calcium, they reduce the risk of osteoporosis. No? So again, no, the use of these agents, the effects of the thiazides, just like loop, is enhanced greatly by your renal prostaglandins, and therefore the use of NSAIDs, which prevent the synthesis and production of prostaglandins, will also greatly reduce the effect of your thiazides, similar to the loop diuretics. No? So these are the various uses of the thiazides. We mentioned them as one of the first liners for mild to moderate hypertension. No? In certain situations that we will discuss in the lecture on heart failure drugs, they're also used in this setting. As I mentioned, they can help prevent calcium renal stone formation. And in cases of diabetes insipidus, nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, we can also use your thiazides, no? So nephrogenic diabetes insipidus is a uncommon condition in which the individual is unable to concentrate urine, no? Because of an impaired renal tubular response to antidiuretic hormones. No? So the individual diureses a lot, no? And therefore is prone to severe dehydration. and electrolyte loss. No? In severe cases, the patient is treated with thiazides, but the mechanism of this paradoxical antidiuretic effect of thiazides is largely unexplained. No? In cases of severe nephrogenic diabetes mellitus, diabetes insipidus, thiazides are given along with an NSAIDs. No? But the mechanism of their action is largely unexplained in this setting. Okay. Now,
Messenger audio.
these are the various adverse effects of thiazides. As mentioned, they can also produce hypokalemia and thereby produce hypokalemic metabolic acidosis. Now, thiazides have been known to impair glucose tolerance. No? So this is something that we have to consider in diabetic DM type 2 patients. And this is because your thiazides can prevent the pancreatic release of insulin, and they can also reduce the peripheral utilization of glucose, probably by impairing insulin receptor sensitivity, no? In the tissues. Now, your thiazides, at least in the initial months of use, have been shown to increase LDL cholesterol by 15%. No? But literature would say that this effect will gradually dissipate with time. No? With continuous use, nawawala itong effect na to, and your LDL cholesterol will eventually decrease. They can also cause, obviously, hyponatremia, and as I mentioned, hyperuricemia and gout. And because they are sulfonamides, they can induce hypersensitivity reactions in susceptible persons. Now, largely because of the electrolyte loss, just like your loop diuretics, your thiazides can also cause weakness, fatigability, paresthesias. They have been implicated in impotence in males with chronic use, and they can actually aggravate acute close-angle glaucoma. No? So we also avoid high doses. We give very careful dosing regimens in persons with heart failure, with liver and renal failure, or in cirrhosis. No? So you have now your potassium sparing diuretics. No? So their effect is by countering aldosterone action on the collecting dust. And this is achieved by several actions depending on the prototype. No? So you have prototypes like spironolactone and eplerenone. They will have direct physiologic blockade of aldosterone. No? Whereas prototypes like amiloride and triamterene will inhibit sodium flow into the ion channels on the luminal side. No? Now, new prototypes like nesiritide and uralitide may have other mechanisms as well. Okay, so in the manuscript that is provided you in the workbook, you have key kinetic features of the potassium sparing prototype. So just please review this table. No? So in this table, you have other potassium sparers like finerenone, no? Amiloride, and triamterene. Now, as the diagram indicates, the potassium-sparing diuretics will prevent reabsorption of sodium in the collecting tubules. And this is how it goes. No? since sodium influx is always coupled with potassium efflux into the lumen, so as you reabsorb sodium, you throw out in exchange potassium. No? So this happens in the collecting duct. So for example, you have sodium in the filtrate, which by the time it arrives in the collecting duct, your sodium is reabsorbed, but you have to throw out potassium in the lumen, no, as a sort of payment. Although the ratio is not 1:1. There's greater sodium reabsorption rather than potassium efflux, no. Nonetheless, you lose more potassium the more sodium you reabsorb in this system. And that is the reason why drugs that work in the segments of the nephron prior to the collecting duct will usually promote also loss of potassium, no? Because, for example, you're using a thiazide or a loop diuretic, no? Because in these segments, the presence of those diuretics will prevent sodium reabsorption. So you have a filtrate that arrives in the collecting duct filled with a lot of sodium. So this triggers the opening of sodium channels, and so there's a tendency to reabsorb the sodium. But when you reabsorb sodium, you essentially have to exchange it with potassium. So essentially, the more sodium you reabsorb in the system, the more potassium ions you have to release into the filtrate, no, as payment. No? So that's why very potent diuretics, especially, are associated with hypokalemia. Now, when you use your potassium sparers, since you do not, this will not promote sodium reabsorption. In fact, this will inhibit sodium reabsorption. You don't have to pay the potassium currency. So because you don't do any sodium reabsorption, you don't need to release potassium into the filtrate. In fact, you get to retain your potassium, no? And so the adverse effect is the opposite, no, to the other diuretics, because this one will potentially cause hyperkalemia naman. Okay. So these are the various, again, no, I would like to emphasize, just like the thiazides and the loop diuretics, the effects of your potassium-sparing diuretics are also enhanced with the use, with the renal prostaglandins. So again, these effects may lessen with the concomitant use of NSAIDs, no, for the reasons that we cited earlier. So on the right side of your screen are the various uses of potassium-sparing diuretics, no? So they are used in hyperaldosteronism, no? And as I mentioned before, no, this can be added to the regimen of a loop or a thiazide to be able to offset the hypokalemic effect of these two agents, no? So when you add your potassium-sparing diuretics, you can lower the dose of your thiazide or your loop diuretics, and you can stop already your potassium supplementation, no? So this will prevent hypokalemia. And the eplerenone has had good clinical showing, no? Because the use of eplerenone has been shown to have a renoprotective effect. They can slow the development of albuminuria in diabetics, and in mild to moderate heart failure following an MI, they have been shown to improve survival rates, no? Again, in diabetes insipidus, they are used, especially amiloride, no? Now, these are the toxicities. Hyperkalemia is one. Hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis is another, but this is not as common as with your acetazolamide. Because they can induce hyperkalemia, they can induce acute renal failure. No? So again, that's the reason why you do not use them with your RAS modulators or even your beta blockers, no, in high doses. Because beta blockers in high doses may also lead to potassium, elevated potassium levels. No? So triamterene can precipitate kidney stone formation. And spironolactone, spironolactone kasi is a drug which has an anti-androgenic effect. No? And normal males usually do not develop enlargement of breast tissues. And this is because the androgens will, their testosterone levels will inhibit the action of estrogen on the mammary tissues. No? Because just like females have normal low levels of androgen, males also have low levels of estrogen, no, in their bodies. But the reason that their breasts do not enlarge is because their androgens or testosterone is able to prevent the effect of estrogen on their mammary glands. So if you give a drug like spironolactone, which is anti-androgen, then obviously this will negate the suppressing effect of testosterone on estrogen, and therefore eventually chronic use in males will potentially cause gynecomastia, no? And the anti-androgen effects will also cause impotence, no, with chronic use. In rare situations, spironolactone has also been implicated in benign prostatic hyperplasia. And this may lead to urinary problems. So on the right side of the screen are situations where we do not use potassium sparers in patients with chronic renal failure, in combination with RAS modulators and beta blockers. No, we do not use them with inhibitors of your CYP3A4 group of enzymes, because these inhibitors, your potassium sparers are substrates of these hepatic microsomal enzymes, and the use of inhibitors will greatly delay metabolism of your potassium sparers and increase the risk of their toxicity. No? The intake of grapefruit juice will favor their absorption. No? So you have increased bioavailability because grapefruit juice is a substance that inhibits your P-glycoprotein. No? Your P-glycoprotein, which is located in the lumen of your GI, will prevent absorption of various substrates, no, and various drugs. So including your potassium sparer. So if you give an inhibitor to P-glycoprotein like grapefruit juice, you get to facilitate absorption, and if there's too much that is absorbed, you increase the bioavailability and expose the patient to toxicities. No? Then the dose is lowered in patients with liver disease, especially with the use of triamterene and spironolactone. So now we have osmotic diuretics. So again, these drugs are not main diuretics, no? So they are not commonly used in this setting. And they are mostly used to reduce intracranial pressure. No, they can be used to decrease intraocular pressure before eye surgery. And In terms of diuresis, they are used in context of dialysis because they aid in the removal of renal toxins, no? So they can be given prior to the start of hemodialysis, no? To as adjunctive agent, no? Now, the site of action of your osmotic diuretics will be the descending limb of the loop of Henle, and to a certain extent also the preceding segment, which is the proximal convoluted tubule. No? Now, they will promote water diuresis in these permeable segments, no? Because they are osmotically active agents and they are filtered through the glomerulus, no? Through the glomerular filtrate, but they are not reabsorbed once they reach the lumen of the renal tubules. No? So consequently, their presence in the lumen of your renal tubules will exert an osmotic pull. No? So you have agents now, the osmotic diuretic will act as a pulling force that will attract water from the interstitium. So the water is attracted into the lumen from the interstitium, and this is released as part of the urine. So mannitol will increase urine flow, no? And because they increase urine flow, no, marami kang pee, they also promote shorter contact time between the filtrate and the tubular epithelium. So there is less time for sodium reabsorption as well. So there is also a some amount of inhibition of sodium reabsorption. But with mannitol and the rest of your osmotic diuretics, the diuretic effect or the water loss exceeds the sodium loss. No? So diuresis is said to be much, much greater than their natriuretic effect. Okay? So, the toxicities are as follows. No? These agents can enter or permeate the extracellular fluid compartment. No? And their presence in these areas will also attract water molecules. So they can cause edema and they can cause hyponatremia early in their action, even before the diuretic effect kicks in. No? So in this way, they can aggravate heart failure and symptoms of pulmonary congestion. Now, when the mannitol is given naman in very high doses, you have the opposite. You can actually induce dehydration and relative hypernatremia. No? Kasi as we mentioned, you lose more water relative to sodium. So in dehydration, mas marami kang tubig. So you have a state wherein you have relatively high sodium in comparison with fluids in your intravascular compartment. And you can also induce hyperkalemia, no? Because as I mentioned, this is an agent that works in a segment prior to the collecting duct. So just like all the other diuretics that work in these segments, you also may have potassium loss. No? Now, however, in renal failure, you can have opposite effects. No? So in renal failure, since mannitol is not filtered through the glomerulus, kasi may differensya, no? So there's a tendency for mannitol to be retained in the blood. So the presence of mannitol in the blood can attract water out of the cells, no? And induce a relative hyponatremia. No? Now, so you have more water in the blood relative to the salt content, no? Because water is attracted out of the cells, no? So in some patients, acute renal failure may actually be precipitated by mannitol. Okay. Now, the ADH antagonists is used for excessive ADH secretion that you will see in chronic heart failure and symptom of inappropriate ADH secretion, no? And these are situations, of course, when you have a tendency to retain volume, no, as well as sodium. So there are several prototypes. The traditional agents like demeclocycline and lithium have very unfavorable safety profile. And the mechanism of action is largely unexplained, no? So nowadays, they are less used for these indications because now we have the Vaptans, no, which are direct ADH blockers. So what are the adverse effects? The adverse effects are as follows, no? They can cause dry mouth, no? They can cause nephrogenic, iatrogenic induced nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. So the patient is unable now to concentrate urine. So you have massive diuresis, no? And this will further aggravate possible dehydration because you lose a lot of water. And because of that, you can have, since you favor more water loss than sodium loss, you have relative hypernatremia, which can be pretty severe. No? And because of these electrolyte imbalances also and other unknown effects, lithium and demeclocycline may actually precipitate acute renal failure. No? So your ADH antagonists generally are contraindicated in liver disease because they can aggravate and increase the risk of hepatic encephalopathy. No? So ang prototypes ng direct ADH blockers are drugs like conivaptan and tolvaptan. These are your Vaptans. These are your new ADH blockers or ADH antagonists. So there are situations that we utilize diuretic combinations. No? For example, when monotherapy with a single diuretic does not work, you can combine several diuretics. No? So you can have take advantage of the synergism between a loop and a thiazide diuretic. But what you have to watch out for is that you can induce severe dehydration naman. So baka mag-contract masyado yung intravascular volume. So you have a problem of hemodynamics. And of course, the danger of inducing severe hypokalemia. So you have to closely monitor your patients for against these eventualities. Then, as I mentioned, to offset hypokalemia, we can give a potassium sparer. We can add this to the regimen of a thiazide or a loop. No? So we can reduce the doses of the loop or the thiazide, no? And the effect of the potassium sparers will oppose the effect of the thiazides and the loop on potassium levels. So magbabalance out yan. No? But if you're already using a potassium sparer, you've already added the potassium sparer, hindi ka na dapat magbigay ng potassium supplement. No? Kasi baka naman you will induce hyperkalemia and precipitate severe or acute renal injury. No? So the potassium sparers are not used, I mentioned, in those who are already taking another form of RAS modulator because of the same reason, no? You're afraid of inducing severe hyperkalemia and with it the complication of acute renal injury. Okay? So these are the various uses of the diuretics in the clinics, no? So in edema 2 states, diuretics are used to mobilize interstitial fluids, no? But at the same time, they're given at a dose that you do not inordinately contract or lower intravascular volume too much, no? So you just want to mobilize fluid out of the interstitial compartment, no? But you want to preserve adequate intravascular volume. So you have to watch closely the hemodynamic condition of your patient. You should not, you should be aware of signs of hemodynamic instability. And also, this is geared, the use of diuretics will, of course, be coupled with a correction of the underlying cause of the edema in the first place. No? So if it's a heart failure or renal disease, then therapy will also be geared towards these underlying causes. No? So in heart failure, for example, it leads to interstitial edema and pulmonary congestion. No? So diuretics are used to mobilize the fluids from the lungs, so you are able to diminish pulmonary vascular congestion. No? So the mobilization of fluids from these interstitial locations or these tissues will improve oxygenation as well as improve myocardial performance. No? Now, diuretics will essentially reduce the preload, no, as well as the myocardial stretch and the size of the heart in congestion. And with this, you lessen the oxygen requirement of the myocardium. So in heart failure, the mainstay is basically your loop diuretics, and we'll go into this in detail in the next lecture on drugs for heart failure. No? But sometimes you combine the loop diuretic with the thiazide, no, as combination therapy in severe cases, no, because in such cases monotherapy will be essentially inadequate. So when using diuretics, your objective will be to preserve hemodynamic stability. So the use of diuretic should not lower cardiac output. So we should be very careful so that the effects of the diuretic will not cause a fall in the cardiac output. No? And then you have to remember that diuretics may precipitate metabolic alkalosis and hypokalemia. No? Especially when we talk about the diuretics that work prior to the collecting ducts. No? And hypokalemia may trigger arrhythmias. And actually, if the patient is also on digoxin therapy, no, in heart failure, then this can, the hypokalemia can aggravate digoxin or precipitate digoxin toxicity. No? So in renal disease and renal failure, the utility of diuretics will be reserved only for the mild diseases, no? But not in a significant fall in GFR. So in severe renal failure, diuretics may be more harmful than beneficial. So in mild renal failure, your diuretics can help correct the salt and water retention. However, their benefits are said to be short-term, no? So they're only used just to resolve the edema and hypertension. but they have not been shown to improve survival. Your thiazides and your loop diuretics are also useful in the management of hyperkalemia in these situations in early stage renal failure of diabetic nephropathy. No? Okay. So in early nephropathy, no, we call that minimal change nephropathy. There is edema or ascites, no. But in such situations, the plasma oncotic pressure is said to be reduced. So the plasma volume in this minimal change nephropathy is also low. So the giving, or in such cases, no, the giving of diuretics in minimal change nephropathy for nephrotic syndrome may actually be unhelpful because they can further reduce intravascular volume and cause hypotension. In other cases of nephrotic syndrome, however, when plasma volume is not decreased, then that's the time that your diuretics may be helpful. No? So in renal disease, you have to be cognizant of certain caveats, no? Certain guidelines. For example, in renal disease, we do not use acetazolamide because in most renal diseases, the sodium bicarbonate is reduced. No? And therefore, the giving of acetazolamide, which will further reduce sodium bicarbonate levels, acidosis is precipitated or exacerbated. Then, of course, we have to remember that potassium sparers can cause hyperkalemia, and states of hyperkalemia can further injure the renal tissues and precipitate or aggravate renal failure. No? So thiazides will not be helpful, and they are relatively of no use or ineffective if the GFR is already below 30 milliliters per minute. No? So in more severe forms of renal failure, your thiazides will not be helpful. No? Now, thiazides will significantly reduce the dose of loop diuretics, no? And the combination will produce significant diuresis in those with the GFR less than 5 to 15 milliliters per minute. No? So, for example, in my document, I added metoclazone and furosemide. No? This can be used for treating volume overdose in patients undergoing dialysis. But this combination in this setting is only used for a short period of time. So, lastly, excessive use of diuretics is, of course, not beneficial for kidney function, no? Especially in the presence of renal insufficiency or renal disease. When we talk about liver cirrhosis, again, this is a condition where you have edema and ascites, you have portal hypertension, and because you have low proteins, no, and low albumin in the serum, you have low plasma oncotic pressure, no. So in liver cirrhosis, you also tend to retain sodium. No, the sodium retention by the kidneys is brought about by the reduce in renal blood flow. No, it is also brought about by the low plasma volume. Kasi bakit contracted ang intravascular volume? Kasi yung fluid mo napupunta sa ascites, no? It is reduced also by hypoalbuminemia and compensatory hyperaldosteronism. Now, spironolactone and eplerenone are the potassium sparing prototypes that are useful in severe cirrhotic edema and hypertension, no? Rather than the loop diuretics, no? The loop diuretics are ineffective in this setting because of reduced tubular secretion and compensatory hyperaldosteronism. So in such setting of edema and hypertension and severe cirrhosis, the most useful diuretics will be spironolactone and eplerenone. So in liver cirrhosis, we avoid vigorous diuretic therapy, no? Because this can further decrease plasma volume, this can precipitate metabolic acidosis, this can lower potassium levels, this can precipitate hepatorenal syndrome and induce hepatic encephalopathy, no? So on the right will be the non-edematous condition. So we have mentioned the utility of diuretics, especially your thiazides, and to a certain extent your loop diuretics in hypertension, no? The loop diuretics in the setting of hypertension is best used only if the GFR is less than 30 to 40 milliliters per minute. So we only reserve this if you have mild renal insufficiency. If the GFR is severely compromised, then the loop diuretics may not be effective, no? And then in the setting of hypertension, I think I mentioned this in my lecture early on, no, on antihypertensive drugs. Dietary salt restriction greatly enhances the effects of your diuretics, no? And this can also lessen potassium loss, no? So the very, very useful adjunctive non-pharmacologic therapy in hypertension is really to adopt a low sodium diet, no? Potassium sparing diuretics may sometimes be included, and this is for the purpose of countering the hypokalemic effects of thiazides or loop diuretics, no? In nephrolithiasis, I have mentioned the utility of thiazides because thiazides will enhance renal reabsorption of calcium, no? In hypercalcemia, your IV loop diuretics or furosemide are given to maintain calcium diuresis. So this will help you excrete excess calcium, no? So for diabetes insipidus, you have either central or neurogenic or a nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, no? So ADH supplementation is effective only for the central type, no? Thiazides, as I mentioned, are useful in reducing polydipsia and polyuria in nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, but this paradoxic antidiuretic effect is not known, no? How the drug works in this setting is not really very clear, no? So, but in severe cases, as well as in lithium-induced nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, your thiazides can be given, and some protocols also include an NSAID. And again, the mechanism of their utility in such conditions is not well explained, no? And then your diuretics can also be given for renal and cardiac protection. So, for example, I mentioned some of your aldosterone antagonists like eplerenone, which have been shown to be renoprotective as well as improve the survival rates in heart failure patients, no? However, generally, your aldosterone blockers may be able to improve albuminuria in diabetics, but you have to watch out that hyperkalemia will not develop, no? Because pag nag-hyperkalemia, this can also be arrhythmogenic, and at the same time, this can precipitate renal injury. So this is the last slide for this chapter, and we will continue with heart failure drugs. So as I mentioned, we will review again some of the features of our diuretic agents. Thank you very much.